sending some pretty strong signals for him to do so. He just never did. Not even over text messages or anything. All he would ever do was flirt. It wasn't very long into that situation that I gave up on him. I figured he didn't like it. And honestly, what else was I supposed to think? I downloaded Tinder like everyone else. I knew that situation was bad, and I secretly fantasized about hooking up with some rich guy. I didn't find a buff millionaire, but I did find a really nice guy eventually. We went on a few dates and started going out together regularly, and I really liked him. We're still together, by the way. But this is where things got weird with James. He started acting differently. He started doing more appropriate things. I was friends with James on Facebook, and when I changed my status to a relationship, he did one of those emoji reactions, with an angry face. I remember seeing it and rolling my eyes. They don't want you until you have something. Now, something James would always do with me is send slightly naked pictures. It wasn't my full frontal or anything like that, but he would take racy photos of himself getting out of the shower or changing, things like that. I was okay, I was single, but he just didn't stop. And these new pics were much more revealing, if you know what I mean. I kept telling him that I was in a relationship and he couldn't do the same. He just wouldn't listen. He always said that he forgot. I knew he was doing this intentionally. He was also got really awkward at work. There were quite a few things that he would do that were just freaky. For example, pens started disappearing from my desk. I didn't think anything of it at first, just that I was being clumsy. But one day I happened to walk by James's desk and notice all of my pens. He also followed me outside every time I went to smoke him. He always played it off like he wasn't doing anything, but it was so obvious to everyone. Well, it was around the 6-month mark I had my performance review and I got a raise. I got an extra $1 an hour, which I was pretty happy about. I had a few $100s in savings and decided to treat myself to my favorite store, Target. I remember making a self-congratulatory post on Facebook about it. I even mentioned that I was going to treat myself to some new sheets from Target.
Wait!
I remember getting comments from some of my friends and former classmates. They all congratulated me and I was really excited. Sure, I had a stupid job, but I was making the best of my situation. I remember getting to Target at about 6 or 7 on a Friday night. I went alone. I walked into the store and went over to the bedding aisle. I really wanted to pick out the best sheets for me. I am a little OCD about fabric and how things feel, so I was running my hands across the sheets to find the one that I liked the best. That was when something unexpected happened.
Wait!
I felt a kiss on my neck.
He's meeting someone in
I had been so wrapped up in folding sheets that I didn't even notice who was behind me.
I don't know.
I immediately thought it was my boyfriend. I mean, who else would randomly kiss me in public, right? Well, you guessed it. It was James. I turned around after he kissed me, and I was smiling. But my giddiness turned to disgust when I saw that it was him.
There you go.
My stomach dropped, and I wanted to scream. But I just couldn't bring myself to do anything. More of me was in shock than anything else. I know I must have looked so repulsed, but that didn't stop him from pinning me up against the aisle rack and continuing to kiss me. He shoved his entire tongue down my throat. It was honestly disgusting. This probably went on for about 3 or 4 seconds before I finally snapped out of it. I pulled my head away and slapped him across the face as hard as I could. I told him that I never wanted to see him again. I fell down onto my back and I just sat there telling him to please leave me alone. He stood there, though, looking down at me, smiling. James was a really freaky guy. He started getting on top of me and kissing me again, and that was when I finally screamed at the top of my lungs. Someone who must have been in an aisle over or two overheard and came running. It was a man who looked like he was in his 30s. He ripped James off of me and threw him against the wall. After that, James took off. The man was really nice to me. He helped me up and made sure I was okay. He asked if I wanted to call the police, and I was so shocked I just told him no in the moment. And that wouldn't be the last time that I saw James. We still work at the same call center, and my God, it's pretty awkward. I know he still creeps on my Facebook and he looks at me all the time. I'm honestly not sure what to do about it. I haven't even told my boyfriend about what happened, and honestly, I'm kind of afraid to. But I seriously might have to, one of these days. I used to love Valentine's Day. I used to love all the cutesy displays and Valentine's-themed stock items we put out in the Walmart I worked at. And I used to love picking out something special for my boyfriend after planning a little date night with him. But we're not together anymore, and I'm not much of a romantic these days either. In fact, I dread February 14th coming around each year because it reminds me of one of the single worst moments in my entire life. So like I said, I worked at Walmart when this all happened, and it actually happened in the store too. I loved the decorating and checking out the romantic stock that we'd gotten in that year, but I usually tried to get Valentine's Day off. Or if I was working it, I'd trade shifts with a coworker. But this one year, I can't get off, and no one would trade with me, so I was stuck working 8 till 5 on Valentine's Day. But it's no big loss. I can wait for my presents, and me and my boyfriend arranged to do something after work anyway, so I took it on the chin. Right after I finished my lunch break, I happened to be walking by one of the Valentine's displays when I see this older guy staring at some of the items. I thought it was the cutest thing ever. This sweet older gentleman looking to pick his wife up something romantic. Or maybe he had his eye on someone in the nursing home he was at. Either way, it was super adorable to me. So I saddled up to the old guy and asked him who the lucky lady is. He's all startled for a moment, again kinda super cute, and has to compose himself before he gives me his answer. There was no one special in his life. He was just something of an old romantic, and seeing cutesy displays like ours on Valentine's Day made him long for lost loves of his. I remember he said that. I then asked if he had his eye on anyone new, and he starts talking in a way I found kind of confusing at first. Like I thought I may have misunderstood, maybe lost the context a little, but after a minute of him just sort of babbling, I realize he's not making any sense at all. He keeps skipping from thought to thought, just like a stream of broken consciousness coming out of him. It was right about then that it hit me that he wasn't all there. That was also about the time that I realized he wasn't that old either. I mean, all his hair was gray. He had like an old man jumper on, but he was so animated when he talked. He seemed sort of spry, like full of nervous energy, and at a push, I'd say he was in his mid-50s. But something about him just seemed off, and I was starting to think that initiating conversation hadn't been the best idea on my part. I wish him luck with who the lucky lady turns out to be, then slowly make a move to walk away. But he stops me, not with a word. I mean, he physically stops me from walking away. He didn't grab me or anything at first. It was just his fingers gently half wrapping around my wrist, but it was enough to really put me on edge. Then he asked me in a way that seemed both extremely childlike and extremely sinister, both at the same time. "Will you be my Valentine?" It was so surreal that initially I thought he had to be joking. Like no sane person would ask anyone that in a serious way, not like that anyway. So I just sort of laughed it off before apologizing and letting him know that I was seeing someone, and right as I do, I try to pull my wrist out of his hand. He tightens it, wraps his entire fist around my wrist, and squeezes. I just froze for a moment. In almost 2 years of working at that Walmart, I've never had so much as an issue with a customer. Maybe it's because I'm short and blonde, maybe it's because I'm just lucky. And because that whole interaction went from 0 to 100 so fast, and given my total lack of experience in any kind of conflict management, I just had no idea what to do. So I froze. The guy starts turning red in the face, and he continues to squeeze my wrist as hard as he could. There are veins bulging out of his neck. He's trembling so hard his eyes are starting to water, and he is strong. Like really freaking strong. Then what he did next haunted me for months afterwards. He gets his face right in mine, while I'm absolutely frozen in terror, and starts singing. He tried to keep his voice down, but he couldn't get the words out without his words trembling from whatever weird rage fit he was going through. After 2 lines, I just start screeching for help, but as soon as I start making any noise, one of his hands shoots up around my throat and pushes me back hard against a shelf. And when he starts squeezing, I stop being able to scream. Then, one of his other hands goes somewhere else, somewhere I really wish he hadn't put it. But when he did, I finally found the strength to really fight back. But it was over moments later. Some other customer had come barreling down the aisle when he heard my scream and tackled the guy so hard that he almost floored me too. And if the guy seemed crazy before he got tackled, afterward he turned into a full-blown lunatic. He actually bit the guy who first got him down, and if it wasn't for security showing up as quick as they did, I think he might have actually gotten free. He was legitimately frothing at the mouth by the time the cops showed up. I've never seen a person look like that before. That guy was more animal than man by that point. And the fallout was huge. Walmart sent me to some trauma management thing that didn't help at all and sent emails around to the other associates promising they'd do better with security and stuff, but it was all just for show. I gave statements to the police too, and for a while, it looked like I'd have to go to court to testify against the guy that assaulted me. But as it turned out, he was found unfit to stand trial, and instead of going to real prison, he ended up in some state hospital somewhere else. When it was all said and done, I just tried to get over it. It was one of the more horrific moments of my life, sure, but I refused to let it define me. And for a long while, I worked on my overall mental health and particularly my sense of self-esteem. I thought I was good after that. I thought I was fixed. So there was no way of me anticipating what would happen when I met a friend at this 50s diner that was our favorite place to eat. We're just sitting there, conversation on hold while we eat, and this song comes on the old jukebox. Until the lyrics started, everything was fine, but then these 2 girls started singing some words that I thought I'd gotten out of my head completely. I know you belong to somebody new, but tonight you belong to me. I recognized it instantly from the weird little changes in pitch in the girls' voices, but it was the exact same song the guy in Walmart had sang before he grabbed me. I know I caused a bit of a scene when I got up and fast walked out of there, with my friend calling after me, but I honestly didn't care. I couldn't breathe while that song was in my ears. I just couldn't be there. I suppose trauma is weird like that. No matter how much you think you have it under control, it's still there, bubbling away just beneath the surface. But I do work at it, and I managed to neutralize how that creepy old song made me feel too. I mean, it took a while, but I managed it. Like I said, I'm not going to let what happened define me, and I'll wear my wounds with pride. But Valentine's Day is most definitely ruined for me. I used to love Valentine's Day. I used to love all the cutesy displays and Valentine's-themed stock items we put out in the Walmart I worked at. And I used to love picking out something special for my boyfriend after planning a little date night with him. But we're not together anymore, and I'm not much of a romantic these days either. In fact, I dread February 14th coming around each year because it reminds me of one of the single worst moments in my entire life. So like I said, I worked at Walmart when this all happened, and it actually happened in the store too. I loved the decorating and checking out the romantic stock that we'd gotten in that year, but I usually tried to get Valentine's Day off. Or if I was working it, I'd trade shifts with a coworker. But this one year, I can't get off, and no one would trade with me, so I was stuck working 8 till 5 on Valentine's Day. But it's no big loss. I can wait for my presents, and me and my boyfriend arranged to do something after work anyway, so I took it on the chin. Right after I finished my lunch break, I happened to be walking by one of the Valentine's displays when I see this older guy staring at some of the items. I thought it was the cutest thing ever. This sweet older gentleman looking to pick his wife up something romantic. Or maybe he had his eye on someone in the nursing home he was at. Either way, it was super adorable to me. So I saddled up to the old guy and asked him who the lucky lady is. He's all startled for a moment, again kinda super cute, and has to compose himself before he gives me his answer. There was no one special in his life. He was just something of an old romantic, and seeing cutesy displays like ours on Valentine's Day made him long for lost loves of his. I remember he said that. I then asked if he had his eye on anyone new, and he starts talking in a way I found kind of confusing at first. Like I thought I may have misunderstood, maybe lost the context a little, but after a minute of him just sort of babbling, I realize he's not making any sense at all. He keeps skipping from thought to thought, just like a stream of broken consciousness coming out of him. It was right about then that it hit me that he wasn't all there. That was also about the time that I realized he wasn't that old either. I mean, all his hair was gray. He had like an old man jumper on, but he was so animated when he talked. He seemed sort of spry, like full of nervous energy, and at a push, I'd say he was in his mid-50s. But something about him just seemed off, and I was starting to think that initiating conversation hadn't been the best idea on my part. I wish him luck with who the lucky lady turns out to be, then slowly make a move to walk away. But he stops me, not with a word. I mean, he physically stops me from walking away. He didn't grab me or anything at first. It was just his fingers gently half wrapping around my wrist, but it was enough to really put me on edge. Then he asked me in a way that seemed both extremely childlike and extremely sinister, both at the same time. "Will you be my Valentine?" It was so surreal that initially I thought he had to be joking. Like no sane person would ask anyone that in a serious way, not like that anyway. So I just sort of laughed it off before apologizing and letting him know that I was seeing someone, and right as I do, I try to pull my wrist out of his hand. He tightens it, wraps his entire fist around my wrist, and squeezes. I just froze for a moment. In almost 2 years of working at that Walmart, I've never had so much as an issue with a customer. Maybe it's because I'm short and blonde, maybe it's because I'm just lucky. And because that whole interaction went from 0 to 100 so fast, and given my total lack of experience in any kind of conflict management, I just had no idea what to do. So I froze. The guy starts turning red in the face, and he continues to squeeze my wrist as hard as he could. There are veins bulging out of his neck. He's trembling so hard his eyes are starting to water, and he is strong. Like really freaking strong. Then what he did next haunted me for months afterwards. He gets his face right in mine, while I'm absolutely frozen in terror, and starts singing. He tried to keep his voice down, but he couldn't get the words out without his words trembling from whatever weird rage fit he was going through. After 2 lines, I just start screeching for help, but as soon as I start making any noise, one of his hands shoots up around my throat and pushes me back hard against a shelf. And when he starts squeezing, I stop being able to scream. Then, one of his other hands goes somewhere else, somewhere I really wish he hadn't put it. But when he did, I finally found the strength to really fight back. But it was over moments later. Some other customer had come barreling down the aisle when he heard my scream and tackled the guy so hard that he almost floored me too. And if the guy seemed crazy before he got tackled, afterward he turned into a full-blown lunatic. He actually bit the guy who first got him down, and if it wasn't for security showing up as quick as they did, I think he might have actually gotten free. He was legitimately frothing at the mouth by the time the cops showed up. I've never seen a person look like that before. Like I was more animal than man by that point. And the fallout was huge. Walmart sent me to some trauma management thing that didn't help at all, and sent emails around to the other associates promising they'd do better with security and stuff, but it was all just for show. I gave statements to the police too, and for a while, It looked like I'd have to go to court to testify against the guy that assaulted me. But as it turned out, he was found unfit to stand trial, and instead of going to real prison, he ended up in some state hospital somewhere else. When it was all said and done, I just tried to get over it. It was one of the more horrific moments of my life, sure, but I refused to let it define me. And for a long while, I worked on my overall mental health and particularly my sense of self-esteem. I thought I was good after that. I thought I was fixed. So there was no way of me anticipating what would happen when I met a friend at this 50s diner that was our favorite place to eat. We're just sitting there, conversation on hold while we eat, and the song comes on the old jukebox. Until the lyrics started, everything was fine, but then these two girls started singing some words that I thought I'd gotten out of my head completely. I know you belong to somebody new, but tonight you belong to me. I recognized it instantly from the weird little changes in pitch in the girls' voices, but it was the exact same song the guy in Walmart had sang before he grabbed me. I know I caused a bit of a scene when I got up and fast walked out of there, with my friend calling after me, but I honestly didn't care. I couldn't breathe while that song was in my ears. I just couldn't be there. I suppose trauma is weird like that. No matter how much you think you have it under control, it's still there, bubbling away just beneath the surface. But I do work at it, and I managed to neutralize how that creepy old song made me feel too. I mean, it took a while, but I managed it. Like I said, I'm not going to let what happened define me, and I'll wear my wounds with pride. But Valentine's Day is most definitely ruined for me. Back when I was in my early 20s, I met a girl who set my entire world on fire. She was smart, beautiful, and had passion for art. We're gonna burn together, she'd say. Not in the literal sense, of course. It's just that romance that we got swept up in was without a doubt the most intense thing I'd ever been involved in with my entire life. It was like a wildfire just burning out of control. Nothing had topped it before, and nothing has topped it since. But let's just say that neither of us were in a particularly good place in our lives, and as passionate as the relationship was, it wasn't exactly healthy for the most part. She was very, very possessive, and I'm not going to lie, I thought that was kinda hot at first. But that got really old, really fast, and her behavior started to cause arguments between us. She would explode at the mention of any other girl. I once mentioned something to do with my sister, and she immediately interrupted to accuse me of being unfaithful. Even after I explained the girl I was talking about was my sister, she stayed mad. It just defied all logic, but I was in love, so I stayed with her. So we're together for 17.5 months, and that time included some of the best and worst moments of my life so far. But in the end, the bad started to outweigh the good, and faced with another Valentine's Day with her, I decided I couldn't do it anymore. I made the decision to break up with her, and as you might imagine, she did not take it very well at all. At first, she was in complete denial, saying that there was nothing wrong with our relationship and that she had no idea why I was trying to break up. Then she got angry, like really angry, started throwing around accusations and threats, none of which I thought that she was capable of acting on. Then came the tears and the final acceptance, by far the hardest part for me. She was crazy, but I didn't think she was a bad person, and it sucked to have to hurt her like that. She insisted on staying in touch, maybe staying friends or something, but I had to go no contact. It was the only way we'd really get over each other. I felt like a monster, but I did it anyway. About a month goes by and I'm sitting in my apartment, alone on Valentine's Day. I'm sort of over this girl, but I'm also sort of not, and with it being Valentine's Day, I'm thinking about her a whole lot. So when my phone buzzes and I see it's a text from her, I'm like rushing to see what it says. I deleted her number, but you know when you just always remember the last 4 digits of someone's number? Yeah, that. So all this message says is, we were supposed to burn together. And that just kind of broke my heart right there. I thought about calling her, maybe try and patch things up, and in retrospect, maybe that's exactly what I should have done. But in the moment, I just tried to stay strong and stick to the no contact rule. I tried to take my mind off stuff, stayed away from all the romantic movies and Valentine's episodes that the TV networks were trying to force down my throat. But still, I just couldn't shake the lonely feeling I had in me. So later that night, I'm kind of intoxicated, just sitting on the couch when my phone buzzes again. I just know it's her, like knew it in my gut, and surprise, surprise, it was. I debated just quickly clearing the notification and ignoring the message, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I found myself reading it. I knew the first line said, "We were supposed to burn together," again from the notification, but only when I opened up the whole thread did I see that underneath the first part, it just said, "But now, you're going to burn alone." Again, it hit me right in the feels. It was incredibly clingy, I know, but at the same time, you can't even deny how poetic that is. Poetry, that's all I thought it was. Just that old metaphor we used to share. I didn't think that she'd take it as far as she did. I didn't think she meant literally burn. Because sometime after that, I'm on my couch and I just started smelling smoke. I go through the stages of thinking I've drunkenly forgotten that I'm cooking, then thinking the neighbors are burning food on accident, then thinking someone is making a campfire outside or something. Just pure denialism, really, not wanting to believe that the apartment building was actually on fire. Then the fire alarm starts going off. I rush downstairs in no shoes or socks, just a pair of shorts and a t-shirt, and run out the back of the building to the fire escape point. And on the way, I see smoke billowing out from under the door of the apartment below me. Minutes later, a fire truck is parked outside of the apartment building, spraying water into the apartment below me, which had been absolutely scorched. It was one of the more surreal experiences of my life. These firemen are asking me if I'm okay, if I needed one of those foil blankets. It was February and it was freezing outside. But all that could come out of my mouth is like, "I know who did this. I know who did this." One of them tells me to get in touch with the police if the cause of the fire was criminal, so I immediately do because, like I said, I had a good idea of who set that fire in the first place. I wasn't quite sure how'd she done it, but having my ex-girlfriend text me "You're going to burn alone," and then all of a sudden there's a house fire? That was a no coincidence to me. No coincidence at all. And over the next couple of weeks, I had to go and stay in my mom's place while some renovation work was undertaken at my smoke-damaged apartment. But I did get in touch with the police, who thanked me for the tip and said that they'd get in touch with me if the cause of the fire was found to be arson. Only it wasn't. They called a little while later to say that a fire department investigator had determined that some faulty wiring was to blame for the blaze, and so they wouldn't need any testimony from me. I brought up the text messages my ex had sent me, how her words seemed to precede the fire in a way that was just too apt to be coincidence. But again, they insisted that no arson was to blame. I even called her and texted her saying that I knew what she had done, that she wouldn't get away with it. But as you can imagine, she played dumb, saying things like, "I don't know what you're talking about. You shouldn't be contacting me." It's something that messes with me to this day, and there are so many unanswered questions that, frankly, I'm not sure I want to know the answers to. I just know that one moment she's texting me, telling me I'm going to burn, and the next, my apartment building's on fire. I'm not saying my ex broke into the apartment downstairs and did something to the wiring, but it's even crazier of me to suggest that she willed something like that to happen, or engineered it or something. I know how paranoid that sounds, so I tend not to put that theory out much, but it had such a profound effect on my mind that I still moved apartments not long after, just to be safe. Because to me, there's still something very frightening about that time in my life, something I can't quite explain. And now, when I remember that old, we're going to burn together, it doesn't set me alight anymore. All it does is make my blood run cold. Beginning on November 22nd, 1986, the life of Oscar Pistorius was unusual from the get-go. He was born missing the outsides of both feet and was also missing his fibula. The fibula are lower leg bones that extend from the knee to the outside of the ankle, parallel to the shin bone, its job being to stabilize the ankle and support the lower leg muscles. Given that he was without such support, his feet were essentially useless. So at just 11 months old, doctors made the decision to remove Oscar's lower legs entirely. At that point, if you'd have speculated that the young amputee might grow up to be a professional runner, people might have called you crazy. But in fact, that's exactly what Oscar became, thanks to a piece of cutting-edge Paralympian technology that came to be known as running blades. Manufactured using carbon fiber reinforced polymer material, the curved design of these blades is intended to store kinetic energy like a spring, allowing the wearer to jump and run effectively. The blades were so effective that at the 2011 World Championships in Athletics, Oscar was the first amputee to win a non-disabled world track medal. And at the 2012 Summer Olympic Games, despite not winning anything, Pistorius was the first double-leg amputee participant, a titanic achievement, we can all agree. Naturally, these victories and appearances made Oscar an international sensation, and he received an incredible amount of fame, wealth, and attention. As a result, Oscar met South African model and paralegal Riva Steenkamp at a party in November of 2012. The pair hit it off and soon began dating pretty seriously. As for a while, it seems that Riva was phenomenally smitten with Oscar. Many of her more superficial friends would wonder aloud what Riva saw in him, but those close to her knew what it was. When Riva was in her early 20s, she had broken her back in a horse-riding accident and was forced to essentially learn to walk all over again. It was one of the most debilitating and humbling experiences of her entire life, and she never forgot how much strength and willpower it took to conquer her temporary disability. She saw that same kind of fortitude in Oscar, and it made her love him for it. The pair spent Christmas of 2012 together, and after a few months more of steady dating, decided to spend Valentine's Day of 2013 together too. It was the perfect date to mark the blossoming of their new relationship, and both parties must have been feverishly excited at the prospect of such a romantic occasion. But what they didn't know was that an evening that would begin with love and affection would end in a nightmare of terror and violence that would set the world's media aflame. According to Oscar, his Valentine's date with Riva went marvelously well. The pair shared a romantic meal, watched a movie, and then after a little too much wine, spent some time in bed together before falling asleep. Then, in the early hours of the following morning, Oscar awoke to hear a noise coming from the ensuite bathroom, one that sounded an awful lot like the window sliding open. Oscar continued to lie there, listening in the darkness, and in the moments that followed, he swore he'd heard someone actually trying to climb in through the bathroom window. Moving as quietly as possible, he slid off of his bed to retrieve a loaded pistol that he had hidden nearby, and arguably, Oscar might be right to be so vigilant. Despite having a population 6 times smaller than the United States, South Africa has 23% more violent crime, and the wealthy Pretoria neighborhood that Oscar called home had been previously targeted by violent home invaders. Approaching the bathroom door with his pistol locked and loaded, Oscar was terrified. His new girlfriend was lying in bed just feet away, and there was potentially a violent home invasion about to occur, and he hadn't had time to put his prosthetic legs on. He was walking on his stumps. Later, Oscar would say this made him feel utterly defenseless. He then heard a noise that, to him, sounded like whoever was on the other side of the bathroom was about to rush into the bedroom to do God knows what with them. He panicked and fired 4 shots through the bathroom door. The first thing Oscar did was turn back towards his bed, where he had expected Riva to be scared out of her wits, having been woken up by the gunshots. But there was no Riva, only an empty bed. It was then that Oscar realized who was behind the door. It wasn't some violent home invader. It was his girlfriend, Riva. He tried to open the bathroom door, but it was locked from the inside. Oscar then grabbed a cricket bat and began to smash down the door and succeeded in creating a large hole through which he was able to crawl. He then unlocked the door, grabbed the unconscious Riva, then actually carried her downstairs in preparation for the ambulance he had called. Riva was rushed to the hospital but was pronounced dead after attempts to revive her failed. For Oscar, it was a living nightmare. It seemed that he tried to defend the girl he loved, but in doing so, had ended up killing her instead. At his trial, Oscar seemed genuinely remorseful, admitting that he had shot Riva by accident and how doing so had destroyed his life completely. It was mostly established by witness testimony that Oscar and Riva had a very healthy relationship and were very much in love. Valentine's cards were presented as evidence, affectionate WhatsApp exchanges that were brought before the court as proof that there was nothing overly sinister about Riva's death, that it was nothing more than a tragic accident. But other evidence was submitted too, evidence that suggested that there was trouble in paradise. In one particular text message, sent less than 3 weeks before her death, Riva told Oscar that she was scared of him sometimes. She said that whenever Oscar snapped, that she was terrified, and went on to describe his behavior as nasty. Riva's mother, June Steenkamp, also had doubts that her daughter's death was merely a tragic accident. She told a courtroom that she didn't believe Oscar's story at all, that none of his actions suggested that he felt protective of her. She believed that Riva and Oscar had a horrible fight or argument that evening, and that she'd fled to the bathroom because she was scared and had naturally locked the door behind her. I think he may have shot once, and then he had to go on and kill her because she would have been able to tell the world what really happened, what he's really like, she later told journalists, asserting that there was no doubt in her mind that Oscar had killed her daughter because she had wanted to break up. I believe their relationship was coming to an end, she said. In her heart of hearts, she didn't think it was making either of them happy. As the trial concluded, Oscar Pistorius was convicted of manslaughter, having escaped the murder charge that state prosecutors were hoping for. The conviction came with a prison sentence of just 5 years, but a combination of cooperating with law enforcement and good behavior in prison meant that Oscar was just released just 10 months into his sentence. He was still under house arrest and had community service to complete, but the fact remains that someone was able to take a life and see the inside of a jail cell for just 10 months. Even in light of the accidental nature of Riva's death, just 10 months seemed like an alarmingly light sentence. But over the course of years, successive appeals and mounting evidence all pointed towards the likelihood that Oscar's version of events was just pure spin, and that somehow he had actually known it was Riva in the bathroom that night before he opened fire. This assertion, that Oscar Pistorius had deliberately murdered his girlfriend, gained so much traction that by 2017, Oscar's sentence was upgraded to murder, and he was sent back to prison for an additional 13 years. It was a strange and drawn-out process, made even more bizarre by the fact that South African courts don't have juries, so any and all evidence was reviewed solely by a handful of prosecutors and judges before any fresh sentence was handed out. What exactly this new evidence showed isn't available to the public just yet, but whatever it did or did not prove, it led to a South African judge to throw the full weight of the judicial system behind one of their country's biggest sports stars. Whatever that evidence was, it must have been pretty damning indeed. And if the death of Riva Steenkamp wasn't simply some tragic accident, then the implications are horrifying. A young model went over to her sports star boyfriend's home, not for any Valentine's Day romance, but to break up with him. This person was so enraged by the rejection that she was forced to lock herself in his bathroom. He tried to smash the door down with a cricket bat, and when he realized she might use her cell phone to call for help, he fired 4 shots through the wood of the door, one of which struck her in the skull. On a day of the year when couples everywhere should be getting together, romancing each other and enjoying their companionship, Valentine's Day of 2013 became one of terror, pain, and death for young Riva Steenkamp, who died scared and alone in the bathroom of a man she barely knew. Every year, without fail, I get a Valentine's Day card. Now, I might be mistaken, but most people reading this are thinking, oh, lucky you, or why is that something to complain about? And 9 times out of 10, you might be right. But the thing is, I have no idea who sends them, and have actually spent a great deal of time trying to figure out who. It wasn't something that was creepy when it started off. In fact, getting a card from a secret admirer was a pretty awesome feeling. The first card came when I was 13 years old, right about the time I needed a little confidence boost. But then when they started arriving year in and year out, I got to thinking it was just my mom sending them or something. I confronted her about it on Valentine's Day when I was 16, and she insisted it wasn't her. I mean, really insisted, saying she'd tell me if she actually knew who it was. I ended up asking all my close family and friends, but none of them admitted to sending me an anonymous card. So, cut to me being in college, it's coming up to Valentine's Day, and I realized that for the first time in a long time, I might not actually get a card that year. Only, I did. Same style, same handwriting, same mystery person that must have sent it. But here's the thing. I had literally just moved dorms like a week prior because of a burst water pipe in my original dorm room. But the Valentine's card is addressed to the new dorm room, which was on the opposite side of campus. Literally the only person in the world who had my new address was my mom, so cue the second confrontation about the Valentine's card in like 2.5 years. One that again ends with her violently assuring me that she hadn't given my address to anyone. So, the question remained, who was sending me those cards? It really creeped me out for a while, but it was something that I grew to live with again. I mean, it seems like such a non-problem, right? I keep getting Valentine's Day cards. People would always just laugh. I'm 33 years old in May of this year. I've moved apartments 3 times in the past 6 years. After my mom died, it got to the point where I'd moved and not a single member of my family knew my address until I told them. So the second time I ran a little experiment. I didn't tell a single person that I'd moved, only my new landlord. The utility companies and me knew I was living in this new place. I waited 2 months like that, having to pick up mail at the old apartment, keeping my address secret until one particular day rolled around, February 14th. Not a single other person knew my address, and I still found a Valentine's card in my mailbox. I'm not gonna lie to you, I'm a pretty strange guy. I've always been a loner, and I've always hated people for as long as I can remember. Which is why it's ironic that the scariest experiences of my life is associated with Valentine's Day. I was working after I graduated high school. I didn't want to go to college as I was really poor, and I didn't even know what I would want to do if I did go. My plan was to lay low for a little while and figure things out, maybe save up a little money. The gas station I worked at was the kind of place that grossed out visiting truckers. I remember this one time when a trucker stopped in. He saw me looking at my phone while I was waiting for him to get ready to pay for his beef jerky. He gave me a judgmental look and said I should take some responsibility for how bad the place looked. I didn't have the energy to explain that I wasn't the owner, so I just rang him out and asked if that was all he was going to order. He paid and left without another word. So yeah, it was one of those kinds of places. Anyway, it was Valentine's Day a couple of years back. I had volunteered to work the night shift because I made a couple of dollars more on the hour, which was always nice. Plus, it's normally pretty slow and there isn't much to do. I normally amuse myself by looking at memes on Reddit. But I remember on this particular night, the entire mood was different. I don't know what it was, but I had an ominous, foreboding feeling in my heart that night. And I'm not normally the kind of person who buys into the whole paranormal thing. I must have gotten that feeling around 12 a.m. I tried to brush it off as best I could, but I felt oddly on edge. The strangest thing was that I had worked plenty of night shifts before. I never had a feeling like this. I was so busy trying to calm myself down and fighting my own fear that I didn't even notice him. A man had come into the gas station. Must have been about 1:15 a.m. or so. I remember his face so vividly, so aged. His eyes were extremely off-putting. If you gazed into them for long enough, you would inevitably find yourself wondering about the guy's mental state. Suffice to say, he was a creepy man. He seemed to be in a rush. I remember noticing how swiftly he moved through the aisles, and he instinctually knew exactly what he needed. Didn't have to stop and think even once. Most people do. He came up to the register, looking to buy a small gardening shovel, duct tape, and a rope. I remember looking down at the items and immediately wondering if this guy was some sort of serial killer or something. That was the exact moment I got out of my own head. I stuttered when I asked him if he wanted anything else. He didn't say a word, just pointed directly at the cigarettes behind my head. I placed a pack of Marlboro Lights on the counter and looked back at the man. He was holding up his hand with 2 fingers. It took me a second to figure out that he had wanted another pack of cigarettes. I rang everything up. I could hear his breathing increasing. It was as if he was annoyed that I wasn't rushing. I tried breaking the tension by making a joke. "Got a gardening day tonight, do you?" His facial expression didn't change at all. He made direct eye contact with me and simply shook his head up and down. I told him that his total would be $34. He slapped down 2 20s on the table, grabbed his items without a bag, and darted out of the gas station. I went outside to watch him leave. I know I'm not supposed to do that, but I couldn't help myself. I was so curious by this point. What was he buying those things for? Did I seriously just meet an actual serial killer? All of the wondering thoughts left my head immediately when I saw him slam on the brakes. He turned his truck around and began speeding back to the gas station. My body went into full panic mode. I ran back inside, closed the doors, locked them, put the close sign up, and I actually called the police. He pulled up outside of the gas station and put his truck in park. My heart was pounding in my chest. I screamed at the dispatch the address and then put the phone down on the counter. I mentally made peace with the fact that I might actually die, and I hoped that at least someone could hear me dying. I heard him start beating on the door trying to get in. The only weapon I had available was one of those shovels from the random utility aisles. I darted across the gas station and grabbed one, bracing myself. I screamed at him that the police were coming and he had no chance. I didn't believe the words as they left my mouth. The doors were made of some kind of fiber or plastic material. I think they were even bulletproof, so I knew I was safe for at least a little while. That was when he stopped pounding on the door. I thought he was going to drive his truck into the gas station to get inside, but thankfully the thought never struck his mind. He did, however, break one of the windows and throw a lit match inside. After that, he drove off into the night. I quickly put the fire out, and the police got there about 20 minutes after everything happened. One of the cops tried making a joke about this guy's attempt to burn the place down, and I was too dazed to hear it. I just remember the guy pity-laughed at his own joke before walking back to his police car. I explained to them the entire situation from beginning to end. I still have no clue why he suddenly decided that he just wanted to hurt me. Perhaps he wanted one less potential witness. Maybe he was just a random psychopath. Maybe it was because he saw me peering back at him and that triggered him. And as dramatic as this experience may have been, I still get really anxious thinking about the items that he had purchased. I still wonder sometimes if he had purchased those things to torture someone he had kidnapped, because he was definitely capable. Even if I ever get a girlfriend at some point in the future, Valentine's Day will never be the same. We wanted to have a good time together, my girlfriend and I. You see, she's a nurse and has to work the night shift. The hospital she works at requires about 5 years of experience before you can even think of working on day shift. This wouldn't be such a problem, but I work as a marketer. I have a typical 9 to 5 in an office, and it's really tough finding time for each other. Our sleep schedules are chaotic, to say the least, so when Valentine's Day rolled around on a day and night that we were both working, we got really frustrated. It's really hard to explain how you feel like you're being cheated out of time, like there isn't going to be a moment you can sit down and truly enjoy your relationship for what it is. But we decided that we weren't going to let our lame schedules get the best of us. We decided that we'd visit a city for a weekend away. Valentine's Day fell on a Thursday, but we figured having a little trip that weekend would be the next best thing, maybe even better. She's been really adamant about visiting Oak Ridge in Tennessee. Her grandfather worked there back in the day, and it's always been of interest to her. She's always telling me these facts about how creepy it is and how she just has to go one day. It's roughly an 8-hour drive from where we live, so we made a deal about driving. I was going to drive the entire way there, and she was going to drive while we were actually in the city. She totally got the good deal of the bargain, but that's just what you do when you care for your girlfriend. But something strange happened. Something that has tainted my memory ever since that time. When I think back and remember that weekend away, I'm not thinking about us cuddling up on the couch, or any of the fun places we got to visit there either. We got there Friday night. She mostly slept in the car, but still felt really tired. She told me she'd be able to sleep that night we got there and be awake and normal for the next day, so that's just what we did. And it was a really great day. We got to visit a museum and learn about the Manhattan Project. Even got to visit the plant where her grandfather used to work. At least we're pretty sure. He's deceased now, but the tour guide said this was where the majority of the work on the bombs were done. And well, he worked on them, I guess. It was crazy. Anyway, the day was great, but it didn't last very long. By the time it was dark, we were out of ideas for things to do and, quite frankly, out of energy. We decided to visit our favorite fast food joint, Wendy's. Don't judge us. And she was driving as we made our way there. It was only a 10 to 15 minute drive. She had her music on and I was just kind of looking out the window. At one point, a blue Mustang was beside her car. We were stopped at a red light, and I looked out the window and peered into theirs. I saw a very old man. He looked unhappy, miserable even. His skin looked unnaturally pale. I'm not sure when he started, but he was staring at me. It wasn't until I looked into the car that I noticed it either. Not gonna lie, it kind of freaked me out. We made eye contact for about 5 seconds, and then for the briefest of moments, he smiled. But it was so fast, it must have been a split second that his mouth went into a smile and then back into a frown. It was the strangest thing I've ever seen. I looked over at my girlfriend, and she hadn't noticed at all. She was jamming out to Bohemian Rhapsody. The light turned green, and we were in motion again. I didn't take my eyes off of that car for the rest of that ride. At least, until they turned. That's not the craziest part. You see, it gets even weirder. We were planning on leaving Monday morning, and on Sunday night we went out to eat, but this time to an actual restaurant. We weren't feeling fast food again. We looked on Google and found a local restaurant that had pretty decent reviews. I had my favorite food, deep-fried chicken, so off we went. I had completely forgotten about that strange man I saw in that car. But about halfway through my meal, I noticed him again. This time he was in the restaurant. He was staring at me. I know he was. And when I noticed, he did that exact same facial movement, just the way I remembered. He went from a miserable frown, and in a split second, he was smiling only for his face to be frowning again in just the next instant. I'm not sure my reaction was warranted. He hadn't actually done anything wrong to me, and I was enjoying a nice meal with my girlfriend, which is why it was so strange for my fight or flight to kick in, and I went up and confronted him. He was sitting in a booth alone. I asked him why he was staring at us like that. To my absolute surprise, he never said a word. just sat there and frowned at me. I asked him what his problem was before my girlfriend told me it was time we head home. She knows I can get a little worked up and wanted to avoid a confrontation. "It's not illegal to look at people," she said. Still, though, it was something about that man that made me feel so strange, so watched. Well, Monday morning came. We were about an hour into the car ride home, and she was asleep again. And you guessed it. You totally guessed it. I saw this freaky old man again. But this time it was way worse. For starters, he was driving a totally different car. I don't know what this guy's life is like, but I can just imagine what you have to do to be able to afford a Mustang and still have enough money to have a second car. And to make matters even worse, he had been in the left lane as he was going to pass me. But he didn't. He just paced me for about a mile. I noticed that there was a car next to me, and it wasn't until I looked over to flip the bird that I recognized him. He was a creepy old man, but he wasn't frowning anymore. That smile that he'd only been able to muster for a split second was now permanently stained on his aged face. It was the most horrifying thing I've ever seen in my life. Suddenly, he turns his head forward and aggressively veers his car in my direction. Reflexively, I slam the brakes and swerve off to the side of the road. My wife is immediately shaken awake, and all we can see is his vehicle speeding off in the distance through a cloud of dirt. My heart was racing like crazy, and by the time I could process my girlfriend screaming, asking what's going on, I started to feel myself choke up. We discussed whether we should waste our time calling the police, but I was so scared that the best course of action seemed to get out of that godforsaken town as fast as possible. The rest of the ride home happened without incident, and I haven't seen him since. Needless to say, that was the least romantic and most insane Valentine's Day ever. This is probably the weirdest experience that has ever happened to me. One that is causing me a lot of trauma and seriously has made it difficult to ever date like a normal person ever again. Let me give you some background. I'm a 23-year-old woman. I live in a small town in rural Mississippi. I know everyone in the town and they all know me. I never quite fit in with the small town scene. It wasn't that I was against it or anything, but there just wasn't anyone I really clicked with. I had lots of friends, but I was still completely alone for as long as I can remember. A couple of years ago, I started dating a guy who I met on Tinder. He was from a couple of towns over and wasn't the best-looking guy in the world, but I don't let something like that stop me. I just wanted to know if he was nice and compatible with me. So we went out on a couple of dates. Didn't go horribly. He was a perfect gentleman, and every time, he never pressured me into doing anything that I didn't feel comfortable with, which I really appreciated. So after about 3 weeks of casual dates here and there, we made the decision that we really had something here. We both deleted our Tinder accounts together and started spending more time with each other. Honestly, I thought we had a real chance of having a lasting relationship. But as the time went by, I noticed that he was weird. And not the I watch conspiracy theory documentaries on Netflix kind of weird. I mean, I saw some real signs of various mental illnesses. Some of them included narcissistic personality disorder, bipolar disorder, with some extreme episodes of anxiety and depression. And he would eventually go insane over some of these things that stressed him out. So one of the times he got into one of those episodes was when his uncle was going to visit. His parents asked him to sleep on the couch so his uncle could sleep in his bed, and he had a literal mental breakdown. I remember me and him texting back and forth, and he was asking me if it was a good idea to physically attack him or start a fight. A few more incidents like that, and I knew that I had to end this relationship quick. As much as I want to help people, I really don't want to sacrifice my own well-being for the sake of helping anyone else. It was probably 3 or 4 weeks into our relationship that I made the decision. I asked him if he wanted to get some coffee, and he agreed. We broke up, and he actually took it rather well, which surprised me. I wasn't expecting him to have some kind of breakdown, and while he did look sad, he didn't act inappropriately towards me at all. He had a solid frown on his face. Then he walked away. I felt bad for doing it, but that was the decision that I made. Now we get into the weird part. In the couple of weeks that we'd been dating, he had never been to my house and had no idea where I lived. That's going to be important to remember a little later on. We probably broke up around April or so. It seems to be somewhere in that time frame at least, so you can understand the terror that washed over me when I saw his car parked in my driveway almost a year later, on Valentine's Day. It had been so long since I had last seen him, I didn't even recognize his car at first. You can bet your rear end that I had my pistol with me ready to protect myself, especially because my parents weren't home. Remember, I live in rural Mississippi. People don't just randomly show up at your house who live 2 towns away. It just doesn't happen like that. He got out of his car holding flowers. I couldn't believe myself. What the heck is wrong with this guy, I thought. I walked up to him, making sure to keep my pistol out of sight. I didn't want to alarm him, but I was ready to use it if he had bad intentions. His face looked strange. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He also looked like he was really struggling and uncomfortable. I asked him what he was doing here after we just kind of looked at each other for a minute, and then he said it. "Will you be my Valentine?" The moment he began to speak, I knew he was intoxicated, and it honestly frightened me. I had heard too many horror stories that start out exactly this way. I pulled my gun out and pointed at him. I screamed, "No! Get away from my home and never come back." He genuinely seemed startled at the sight of the gun. Then he got going to his car and drove away. But as he ran, I noticed that he dropped something metal in the hurry. It must have just barely nudged out of his pocket. After he sped off, I waited a few minutes just to make sure he was gone. Then I walked over towards the object that he dropped on the floor. I couldn't make it out at first because of the darkness. I picked it up and put it under my phone light. I was mortified. It was a pair of metal handcuffs. Just imagine how much he must have thought about me. That he waited all this time, building up the nerve to just randomly show up at my house with a pair of freaking handcuffs, ready to do God knows what to me. It was honestly quite horrifying. I called the police and reported him. They couldn't really do anything, seeing as he technically didn't commit a crime, so I made sure to tell my family and friends to watch out for him if they happened to see his vehicle around. I just imagined how different my life would be if I hadn't been armed that night. I was all alone, and my parents wouldn't have been home for hours. There was a solid chance of him kidnapping me and becoming someone you see on a true crime documentary. This has been a big reminder for me, and let it be a lesson for anyone listening right now. If you're defenseless and alone in the middle of nowhere, make sure that you have some way of protecting yourself, because I'm sure that I'm not the only girl in the world he's ever going to try this stunt on again. A couple of years ago, me and my husband decided that we were sick of the pressures of Valentine's Day. The cards, the flowers, the last-minute bookings, and so on. Instead, decided that we'd make a whole week out of it. We thought if we could spread the romance over a period of 7 days, it wouldn't be as wearing, and we both wouldn't feel that stress every couple feels in the weeks leading up to it. So, living in the UK, we decided that it wouldn't be too hard to get to Lake Geneva, find a cabin we could rent for the week, remote, with perhaps a little restaurant a little drive away, and settle down. My husband spent some of his childhood there, and this gave him an opportunity to stop in on some of his old friends and family whilst we were there. It sounded like the perfect trip. We booked time off of work, scrolled some websites, and ended up finding this lovely semi-resort. It was essentially a collection of cabins or lodges made for couples. They were all fairly far apart from each other, but were connected by small gravel paths to a central area, which had a restaurant owned by a fairly famous chef, a lodge that acted as reception, and a spa. There were some facilities dotted around, but all with appropriate architecture, so even though it was pretty much a resort, it would never feel like it. Sure, it was a little expensive, but we saw it as an opportunity to combine a holiday and expensive Valentine's dinner. In a weird way, we thought we were saving money. The staff there were all incredibly polite when we arrived. They knew our names instantly from our online booking and made sure to whisk our bags away almost instantly. Whilst they went through the process of booking us in, they gave us each a complimentary cocktail and sat us by this vast glass window that overlooked the lake. It was unbelievably stunning and so quiet. That was what we appreciated the most, I think. A break from city life, somewhere where we wouldn't have to worry about the crowded bus or getting a cab after one too many glasses of wine. We were coming to the end of our cocktails when a man came and sat down next to us. He introduced himself as Luca and had one of those funny European accents where you can't quite place it. The English accent was almost perfect, but a couple of clipped vowels and funny consonants meant you could instantly tell he wasn't actually, well, English. He seemed friendly enough. Tall, athletic, wearing white tennis clothes. He asked us where we were from, and we said the UK, and we chatted for a little while about that. I do remember him saying that I looked just like his wife and that we should meet her. I remember that because he kept looking out for my doppelganger whenever we'd take walks around the resort, trying to see if I could spy curly blonde hair. We said that we were sure we'd catch him either in the restaurant or perhaps the spa, and were intrigued to meet his wife. He seemed a little odd in his own way. His eye contact was a little too intense, and he spoke a little too loudly, but being British, we thought that maybe this was just a cultural difference. Unfortunately, February isn't the best time for a trip to a resort in Switzerland. The weather there can be pretty up and down, and for a lot of our time there we were pretty much rained out of doing anything outside. But we were a married couple, and it wasn't hard to find things to do around Valentine's Day that required being inside. Luca's cabin must have been close to ours because we'd see him fairly often, on our walk to breakfast, passing through when we were having lunch, that sort of thing. I decided pretty quickly that I didn't like him. I decided that it wasn't a cultural difference, that he was actually quite rude and would always try to steer the conversation back to himself whenever we'd have a quick chat. He'd make a point of humble bragging about whatever he was off to do, and it began to make me angry. I was, at the end of the day, trying to have a week with my husband, and it was kind of ruining it. My husband snores, loud, and so quite often in the middle of the night, I'll get up and move to the sofa. It's sort of become a little ritual, and I don't mind really doing it. I can usually fall back asleep pretty quickly, if not instantly. Earplugs only go so far when you can genuinely feel the guy vibrating as he snores. Trust me. So the second night we're there, I get up and move to the couch in the front, which faces a huge glass panel overlooking the lake. I have to turn on a lamp to find my way around, not knowing the layout of the room off by heart like I do at home, and I see the window. The view is stunning, and even at night if you sit and watch for a while and let your eyes adjust to the dark, you can make out lights across the water and begin to see the scenery. I was watching the view like this when I spotted something. It's funny how you can make out shapes in the dark, but I'd gotten used to the way the branches of the trees moved in the slight wind, which was why I noticed something so still. Still, and in the shape of shoulders and a head. It was down the path a little way, the path that led into the resort, and it just stood there, watching something. I became very aware at that point of the lamp that was going on, and the fact that although this figure was just a dark shape to me, it could see right in and see me. I began to feel really, really scared. I didn't want to panic, but I started by saying my husband's name very quietly, then a little louder, then louder until I could hear the slight panic in my voice. The figure didn't move. It must have been about 100 feet away because I couldn't make out any features, just a shape. I called again and my husband came out of his room. He asked what was wrong, and when I tried to show him what I'd seen, the figure was gone. I guess it had seen someone else come into the house and had decided to leave. I explained what I'd seen, and although my husband was supportive, he said at that distance, at night it could have been anything. Could have just been a member of staff doing a nighttime check or a security guard. Whatever it was, despite his snoring, I slept in his room for the rest of the night. The next day we had breakfast as usual. Luca came past and chatted to us for a little while. I didn't say anything. I began to become a little convinced that it had been Luca who had been watching me that night. I hated the way he talked about his wife whilst looking at me, as if just because we looked the same we were somehow connected. Although there was still a little anxiety from last night, I managed to enjoy most of the day. That night we slept in the same bed, and I made sure to choose the side closest to the wall. Then it was Valentine's Day. Since our plan was to have the whole week to do it, we took it easy, having a late brunch at the restaurant. Just when I thought that maybe Luca had left, he came past. I thought it was strange that he wasn't with his wife, but he said something about her going on ahead to get a good court for tennis. We said we were considering an afternoon game, and I remember him seeming a little concerned. He told us that they were all booked up and that he thought that maybe we'd have better luck booking a day or two in advance. We were a little disappointed, but hey, it allowed us to have a Bloody Mary after brunch, so we weren't complaining. That night we got drunk after dinner, like, really drunk. I think we got a little carried away on their 2-for-1 Valentine's cocktails because we were giggling like schoolchildren. We chatted to a few of the other couples we'd met, ate some amazing food, watched the rain on the lake. Thankfully, Luca was nowhere to be seen. We stumbled back to our cabin, sharing an umbrella lent to us by the staff, and after doing what couples would do on Valentine's Day, my husband fell asleep. I lay in bed a while, had a couple of glasses of water from the sink to try and prevent the hangover I knew was coming. After I stopped the tap running, I thought I heard the drain stutter for a second. I listened a little closer. No, it wasn't a stutter. It was a noise like knocking, only a little more frantic. In triplets, dum, dum, dum. I listened again. The same noise, louder. Then I realized what it was. Someone was trying the lock on the window. They were trying to see if it was locked. As I stood there trying to make as little noise as possible as I moved across the room to wake my husband, I heard footsteps moving around the cabin, and then the same noise, but louder. The same person was trying the door now, but they were more determined, really pushing and pulling. I didn't want to make a noise, but I shook my husband as violently as I could to wake him up, and whispered what I thought was happening. He was dead to the world, and as I tried to wake him with a hushed voice, I could hear whatever it was trying the door a few last times, but harder. Finally he woke up and saw the panic in my eyes. He got straight to it, turned on every light in the cabin, and grabbed a broom as he made his way to the front door. There was nothing. No one. I was sure, though, and he could tell from how I was acting that I was serious. We called the resort's security, who came over and were extremely polite, and even the manager of the place came down to assure us that it was all fine. They said they'd look into it, that sometimes the wind made noises like that, and were even so kind as to make sure a security member sat outside our cabin for the rest of the night. There were no signs that anyone had been around, and so they said if we were sure we wanted to report something, they'd happily come with us in the morning. As we were talking the next morning, I felt like I wanted to mention Luca, but didn't want to seem paranoid. But I'd barely slept and my mouth seemed to run on its own. I mentioned that Luca had always acted strange to us, and that I thought his cabin might have been near ours. They told me that whilst it wasn't their policy to report on guests, they could tell me that Luca's cabin was actually fairly far away from ours. His was in the singles area, for people on retreats, writers, artists, etc., and that the couple's area was the other side of the resort. I mentioned that his wife must have been staying near us then, or something like that, and I remember the woman behind the desk looking puzzled. She said Luca came alone, left after lunch on Valentine's Day, and that there had been no woman with him at any point during his stay. It'd come alone and left alone. They'd have known any visitors have to at least sign in at reception. When I mentioned looking into this further, I was really rattled by the whole thing. They said although they would flag it with local police, there wasn't much they could do. Luca wasn't a Swiss national, and they couldn't follow him just because a guest thought that he might have been stalking them or something of the sort. They asked if I'd even seen Luca during either of the encounters I'd had, and sadly, I had to say no. When they heard that, they shared a look that I could instantly tell meant they didn't quite believe me. The resort offered all sorts of compensations, a free dinner the next night, and even offered me a discount on a week's stay another time. Despite the offer, I don't think we'll be going back anytime soon. I have never been a huge fan of Valentine's Day. I have always found the holiday to be kind of a drag and a waste, kind of like New Year's Eve. At the time of the story, I was 20 years old. I worked at a small convenience store that was open 24 hours. I told them that I would work the overnight shift on Valentine's Day because I didn't have any plans. The night started out just like any other night shifts I had worked in the past. Very slow and boring, so I was able to get most of the work done by about midnight. I usually spent the remainder of the shift just watching YouTube or Netflix. At about 1:30 a.m., the bell rang, alerting me that someone had entered the store. He was a tall, somewhat handsome man from what I could tell at a quick glance. I shouted, "How are you tonight, sir?" And he responded almost immediately, "Cassie, is that you?" I paused for a moment in disbelief that he recognized me, and then that's when it hit me. It was a guy named Ricky that I went to high school with. We were never really close, but always very friendly. I immediately greeted him with a hug because that's just my personality. After a minute or two of catching up, I finally asked, "What are you doing in here so late?" He frowned slightly and said, "Well, I just broke up with my girlfriend about a week ago, and honestly, I've been a bit of an insomniac lately and just wandering around." I said I was sorry about the breakup and asked if he needed anything, and he responded in a very genuine voice. "Honestly, it's just really great to see an old friend, and if you wouldn't mind, if you're not too busy, I would love to just sit and talk for a while." I actually thought it was kind of sweet, and felt bad, so I told him he could hang and we could just talk and catch up. The first 10 to 15 minutes were normal, even enjoyable. We laughed and joked about some old high school memories. After about 15 minutes, he asked to use the restroom, and of course I let him. This was when I started to think things through a little bit. This random guy showed up in the middle of the night and just happened to immediately recognize me and strike up a conversation with me. I was sure it was just a coincidence, but it did seem a little bit weird. While he was in the bathroom for a minute, I decided to search him on Facebook and noticed he had some mutual friends. The first thing I noticed was that he had some weird photos. Pictures of him with knives and lots of symbology stuff that almost looked like witchcraft or something. I don't know, I'm not much of a horror buff, but one of the pictures definitely had a pentagram in it. He came out of the bathroom a few moments later, and this is when things started getting really strange. I threw my phone back down and greeted him as if everything were normal. He said in a low, almost disturbing voice, "I'm so happy to see you again." I responded in a confused manner. Yeah, it's great seeing you too." He slammed both hands on the counter that I sat behind and said in a now aggressive voice, "You don't understand. I'm so happy I found you. I love you, Cassie. And we were meant to be together." Going from semi-creeped out to full-on terrified, I just responded nervously, not knowing what else to say. Thanks, Ricky, but I'm seeing someone." That, of course, was a lie, but I honestly didn't know what else to do. At this point, he tried to grab my arm from the other side of the counter, and I jumped back quickly and told him he needed to leave. He took a step away from the counter and looked at me with almost lifeless eyes and a smile that left my body paralyzed. He dropped his coat to the ground and took his shirt off. He was covered with tattoos, really creepy tattoos. Across his chest was the word animal in a crazy font. The rest of his torso was covered with strange symbols. I'm not sure actually what kind of symbols. Under his left pec was my name tattooed. It literally said Cassie in cursive. He then pulled a knife out of his pocket and pointed to the tattoo of my name while he continued his sinister smile and gaze. I know it's easy to say what you would do in this situation, but I was frozen. I felt lightheaded, like I was in a dream and couldn't wake up. I was scared if I made a move, he would lunge at me or try to grab me again. He started to scream my name loudly. "Cassie! Cassie!" I started to cry. I couldn't even catch my breath, and that's when it happened. The bell from the door rang. It was a big man walking into the store. Ricky didn't even flinch. He kept his gaze fixed on me and was slowly approaching me. Once the man saw what was happening and saw me cowering in fear, he ran over and pushed Ricky down. Ricky got up and ignored the man completely and still kept his crazy gaze on me. I picked up my phone to call the police, and that's when Ricky finally ran and tried to jump the counter, and the man took him down again, this time holding him down until the authorities showed up. Ricky was arrested, with that blank stare across his face. That man who saved me just happened to be a passing truck driver wanting to grab a hot cup of coffee. I feel like I owe him my life. I have no idea what Ricky planned on doing, but he was charged and they used video footage from the store to help with the conviction. I'm so thankful for that truck driver, and I will never forget that evil, dead look in Ricky's eyes as he lunged for me. And what was that tattoo? Was it really my name? Or for someone else named Cassie? I don't work overnights anymore, and I actually moved far away from this town. I'm not sure if Ricky ever got help or is still in jail. I have no idea when or where this obsession he developed for me began. And honestly, I don't care. I just hope we never meet again. Valentine's Day is a time for love and showing emotion and gratitude to that very special person in your life. 4 years ago, my girlfriend and I decided to go out for Valentine's Day. Where we live, it is still fairly warm in February, so I decided to take my girlfriend on a picnic that we had been planning for about a week or so. My girlfriend and I love being outdoors, and I figured after the picnic, perhaps we could walk on a trail or perhaps take a quick hike. About a month ago, while I was hiking, I found this amazing spot where I thought we could have the picnic. From one of the main trails, it only took about 15 minutes to walk there, and it wasn't that hard of a walk either. You did have to go off of one of the main trails, around a semi-narrow bend and leading to a small rock formation. The area overlooked our home. It was a beautiful view and enough flat land where we could sit and have a really nice picnic. I set up an entire area for us, chairs, tables, and a bunch of our favorite snack foods. On the rear side of this spot was more woods, and even in the daylight there were so many trees back there that it seemed dark. So when Valentine's Day finally came, we set off for our adventure. Thankfully, it was a beautiful sunny day. It was warm with a nice breeze and not a cloud in the sky. We held hands on the trail until we got to the spot where I went off the trail. I told her to trust me as we went off the path. She was hesitant, but was down for the journey. Just as I expected, the short trip was easy for her. We reached the spot in no time, and she was blown away. She just stopped and stared out at the horizon in awe. When she saw the spread of food I had, she was even more blown away. Today could not have gone any better, and in almost a blink of an eye, that changed. While we were laughing and staring at the beautiful view, she stopped suddenly. I asked her what was wrong, and she said that she had heard something in the woods. I looked behind in the dark trees, but saw nothing. I told her she was crazy, just kidding around, obviously, and tried to go back to flirting with her, but she wasn't having it. She insisted that I checked out the woods. So, annoyed more than anything, I told her I would. I got right up to where the tree line started, and I peeked through some endless amounts of trees. I saw nothing. If I'm being honest, I had a really hard time making out anything in there, but I truly didn't see anything. She approached after a minute or two and said in a terrified voice, "Right there. You don't see that shape? It looks like a person." I squinted and tried to make out the shape. It just looked like a shadow to me. "Babe, I think that's just a shadow," I responded in an almost condescending voice. She was hysterical and asked me to please look at it. So I stepped into the dark forest, and to my absolute fear, the dark figure moved. It was very slight, almost like a shoulder shrug, but I saw it. At this moment, I felt intense anxiety and fear, but I didn't want to freak out my girlfriend, or even worse, alert this potentially dangerous person that I knew that they were there. After only a couple of steps, I told my girlfriend I needed something, and I turned back to where we were sitting. I grabbed my girlfriend and tried to tell her not to freak out, but that I did in fact see a person in the trees. She was crying hysterically, and I was just trying to think of the best way to get out fast. I looked down over the lookout, but it was just too steep. The only way was the way we came, which was fine, but I just didn't want this lunatic to follow us. I decided to leave all the stuff behind and start walking down the rock formation. She went down first as I stared into the trees, and that's when I saw it clear as day. This shadow figure was definitely a man, and he was approaching us now. He was only about 45 or 50 feet away. I couldn't make out any specific details, but it looked like he had a beard. I finally started going down the rock formation, and I told my girl to run as fast as she could. We made it to the trail quickly. As we stopped to catch our breath, we heard the rustling of trees and the crack of sticks. This man was chasing us. She pulled out her phone to call the police, but apparently she didn't have a signal. Of course. We finally reached the parking lot of the park trails, and there were 2 police cars. The police were already looking for someone. Apparently, there was a woman jogging the trails early in the morning and found a man laying off to the side of one of the trails. She called the authorities right away, and the man reported being mugged and robbed. We told the cops everything, but by the time they got into the woods, they couldn't find the man. From what I understand, they never caught this crazy person in the woods, and I'm not sure what he would have done if he actually caught up to us. I still can't believe my girlfriend spotted him from so far away, and I'm so thankful she did. We both have a really hard time going on nature trails now, and I still have yet to return to that specific park. From now on, we decided it was best just to stay indoors, especially for Valentine's Day. This is a short story that happened to me last year on Valentine's Day. I recently bought a house with my soon-to-be husband. He works really hard and always spoils me when he can. While he was at work, I decided to run down to the local store and buy some stuff to make him a romantic dinner. The store is literally 100 yards away from my house at most, so I quickly left around 1 p.m. and did not lock my door. I live in a really safe area with hardly any crime, and the police station right around the block. I was going to be back in less than 10 minutes, so I didn't think it was a big deal to lock my door. I left and came back in just under 15 minutes. I waited in line longer than I thought. The rest of my afternoon was normal. I prepared dinner and got the table set with candles and everything along those lines. My afternoon was fairly normal, just like any other day. At about 4:30 p.m., I went to the bathroom and thought I could smell a funny smell, almost like cologne. My boyfriend didn't wear cologne, but I didn't think too much about it. Maybe it was my body wash from the shower or something along those lines. A little after 7, my boyfriend came back from work. He greeted me with Valentine's Day flowers and an amazing piece of cheesecake that I would be having for dessert. I was thrilled. He was also so thankful for the dinner I had prepared for him. We had a lovely evening. After we ate, he said he was going to go wash up and meet me on the couch for a movie and some cheesecake. As he walked upstairs where our bathroom was, he stopped talking mid-sentence and said in a voice that still haunts me, "What's that smell?" I came to the bottom of the stairs and asked if he smelled the cologne too. He did, and immediately mouthed the words, "Call 911" to me. I went into the other room and called. I tried to whisper as to not alert the potential intruder. What my boyfriend didn't tell me until later was that he saw muddy footprints on the bathroom floor, and the shower curtain was open with 2 wet, dirty footprints inside. Next to the bathroom is a spare room that we don't use, and the door was shut. And that door is never shut. He grabbed the door slowly and tried to turn the handle, but it was being held from the other side. He kicked open the door, and to the horror of both of us was a small, dirty-looking man. He was dressed in all black with brown work boots. My boyfriend, who was only an average build, slammed him down with ease and pushed him against the wall. After only a few moments, the police showed up and we quickly ran upstairs. Luckily, nobody was hurt, and the intentions of this intruder were unknown. I was alone all afternoon and did nothing. I couldn't sleep well that night. I remembered that it was all my fault. I always locked the door, and this one time I decided not to. I began to freak out that the man was in the shower right next to me when I was going to the bathroom. I'm just thankful my boyfriend didn't get hurt, and the police station is literally right around the block. This year he took off Valentine's Day with me, and we're still trying to cope with the experience. Which part is we still never got answers. We don't know when this man broke in. I'm not sure we ever will. So the events of this story happened 2 years ago on Valentine's Day. It was the first Valentine's Day I celebrated with my fiancé Pete. We decided it would be nice to go on a double date with a mutual couple we both knew. The evening was nice and relaxing. We went to the house right away and had some gas. None of us really like going out drinking and partying, so this was an ideal night for us. After a couple of hours, we decided we were going to go home and watch some movies and fire curtains. At the couple whose house we went to didn't too far away, but they did kind of live in the middle of nowhere. We live in a decent-sized town, but once you reach the outskirts of town, it's a lot of fields, farms, and huge open fields. So even though it was only about a 10-minute drive, it feels like you're in the middle of nowhere. When you leave our friend's house, you travel down a long road with no lights for about a mile or so, then take a left and travel down another even longer road in the pitch black until eventually you reach the outskirts of town. Well, about halfway down the road, we saw these flashing lights shining through the seemingly endless row of trees until we finally saw them. After we passed all the trees, we pulled over on the side of the road, and there, hovering over the field, was a massive craft of some kind. I'm not real good with measurements, but I would say about the size of a plane, but a very strange shape. It was long and kind of flat with a pointed edge. It was clearly hovering over the field, high enough that it was well above us, but not moving. There was lights all over the craft, and many of them were flashing in an erratic pattern. My then-girlfriend and I sat in amazement and admittedly fear of this huge craft. And the most peculiar thing was that it was quiet. You couldn't hear any noise whatsoever coming from the craft. As I took out my phone to try and record this, all the lights went off on the craft. I tried to snap a picture at this point, but it was just too dark, and the picture just looks black. The craft then started to make a very loud humming noise, and even though we could barely see it, it started to slowly approach the room where we were parked. At this point, scared and nervous, we decided to drive away. When we got to the end of the road, we saw the lights again poking through the trees. Once we got home, we tried calling our friends several times, but they didn't answer. Finally, about an hour later, she called back and said she was sorry and didn't even hear her phone ring, which we found strange because her phone was always on high.
Mr. Hudson.
We told her about the events, and she seemed very skeptical. She said living over there her entire life, she has never seen or heard anything like that ever. We talked about the event for a while and eventually said goodbye and enjoyed the rest of Valentine's Day, and really had a great rest of the
CIA,
evening.
clandestine special officer.
Shortly after that night, we found out that several people in the area had experienced seeing strange things like that.
Mr. Adler.
Apparently, there is a
should we take
military
this
base
more
nearby,
serious
and
threat
some
than
believe that they are testing some kind of new
don't have to,
military
sir.
equipment.
Yeah.
Others think
Been a lot
it's
of
something
innocent-
perhaps extraterrestrial. I'm not sure what I saw that evening, but
This
I
is
know
Hudson.
beyond a shadow
How
of
long
a
until
doubt
we
I
have a
saw
lead on
something big,
Perseus?
They're
and
about to
very
get
close
started.
to me,
Adler's in West
something
Berlin.
that I am unable
Should
to
be at the
explain.
safe house soon.
Do you trust him?
Has anyone ever seen this craft I
I'm
speak
not the
of?
one you should be asking,
I'm
Black.
just looking for
What about his
answers.
team?
It's a strong
The last 2 years on
He chased down
Valentine's Day, we
Sims,
have gone
SLA,
back at the same
even
time
pulled
to
some
see
strings
if
to
we
get
see
Helen
anything,
Park from
and
MI6.
we've seen nothing
We'll get
since
the
that
Mason
night.
and Wood soon.
Though
I'm
this
not
was
so sure
strange
about
and
Park.
terrifying,
She and Adler have
it
that
has given
business
us a
from before.
Valentine's Day tradition,
Court-
and an event that we will never forget. The contents of this story have caused me to recently move back with my parents who live in another state. Last year, I was enjoying my first year of being a college grad and living in my own house. Well, a house I rented, but I still lived alone. I was focused on my job and wasn't really looking for a boyfriend or anything like that. Every morning I go down to the park, which is only about a 2-minute walk, and I jog before getting ready for work. On Valentine's Day, my routine was no different. As I was finishing my jog, I was approached by a pretty handsome-looking man. He was tall, looked in shape, styled hair, and super white teeth. My creep alarm was not going off at all. He said in a calming voice, "You're very pretty. And I just thought I wanted to tell you that, and hope you have a wonderful Valentine's Day." And then he just jogged off. Honestly, it kind of made me smile because that kind of stuff doesn't usually happen to me. After all that excitement, I just continued on with my day like I would any other day. At about 1 p.m., the secretary at my job told me I had a package. I thought this was very strange considering I had never gotten packages
Belle.
before.
Welcome to
It was
West
a huge, beautiful bouquet of roses. There was a note on the roses that
Berlin. We've got a
said,
job to do.
"To the lovely lady I saw at the park. I hope this makes you smile."
Adler?
Now, it did make me smile, which is stupid, but I admittedly realized how weird and creepy it was. That night, I was cooking dinner and was going to do some work from my home computer.
Let's get started.
I thought I could hear a noise outside my window, but
Been a
I
surge
just
in
chalked it
Russian
up to the
chatter in
wind or
last
something.
48 hours.
I got up a little
CIA,
after 8 to
have
clean some
inside
dishes and
sources.
take a break from the
Anything's
computer.
confidential.
I looked out
So
my
far,
kitchen
they know
sink
we
window and saw a car outside my house
MI6
parked in the
has come up
street.
empty-handed as well.
No, I had no other
We'll have to
reason to be
start
freaked out other than just a bad feeling.
So we're
There
going
was no
back
parking
here.
on my street after 7 p.m., and I had never seen this car before.
One of our closest encounters.
Now again, there could have been dozens of explanations, but
Some part of me
I
always
just
knew
didn't
that
feel
was
good about the entire situation. It just felt really off.
everything we've got on the
I sat back down at the computer trying to focus on my work, but I had this sickening feeling in my
We're
stomach.
looking for code names. and
As I
code
sat there in dead
translations.
silence in
Russian
my
activities,
room is
NDA,
when I was
anything.
sure I could hear something. I had a window that sat right next to my computer where I was sitting.
Bell, this is where you
I pulled back the curtain
the best in the CIA.
and exposed the man from the park trying to break into the window.
Head to
We
the
locked
evidence.
eyes,
Retrace
and he
our
just
steps
stared
from
at me
there.
like a deer in
Anything
headlights.
to give us a lead on Perseus.
He did not have that same smile as before at the park. He looked mean, aggressive. After only a couple of seconds of eye contact, which seemed like an eternity, he started to bang on the window and screaming, "Let me in." I screamed and ran to the other room, calling the police. He must have heard me because I saw out of the kitchen window him run to the car in front of my house. I couldn't make out the license. All I knew is that it was a white Chevy of some kind, which describes about 1 billion people. I never forgot the look in his eyes. Almost immediately, I moved home.
I'm going to need to
I never stayed in
process
that
some
house
of the
again.
negatives.
I was advised to stay at a hotel for a couple of nights, and then I drove home to my parents. I'll never forget that almost evil look he had as we locked eyes through the window, no more than inches apart. They never found the man I described, and many people think I made this story up. But I'll never forget the horror of that Valentine's Day. Have y'all been following all these Zoom and Skype dates that have been happening since the lockdown started? As you imagine, the use of dating apps have skyrocketed since the government had ordered us all inside for the foreseeable future.
Working with the CIA.
Those who
over
would
a decade.
usually flaunt their game in the club or
On
at the
their
gym are
actual
now
payroll?
forced to use the same
Going on about
tactics
5
as
years.
the less socially adept of us
I was
in
born
dating
in DC.
apps. And
Parents
although
moved
I'm
to
not
Israel
entirely
when I was a
happy with
kid.
the increased competition,
Dual
I'd be
citizenship
lying
has
if I
its
said my
advantages.
match count hasn't bumped up a
Yeah.
little.
I
Silver
landed in
linings, right?
Israeli Defense Forces out of university.
Anyway, instead of using
Yeah, to
Tinder or Hinge, with
After that,
their
the
increased
Mossad.
emphasis on physical
That's when I first
appearances,
started working with the
definitely not
CIA.
my strong point, given I'm about 30 pounds overweight right now, I opted for Reddit's R for R forum, which is full of posts from those who want to hook up for conversation, flirting, and occasionally even more. So, I put up this pretty dumb post, basically asking if there were any girls that wanted to have like a lockdown date or whatever. I listed a bunch of my interests, mainly horror movies and a few political issues close to my heart, and implored anyone who identified with them to get in touch. One or two girls did, and I feel mean admitting this, but they just didn't seem particularly engaging. Nice, yes, charming, one really was, but our talks didn't light a fire in me. Not like the message I got in the wee small hours of the morning when I was up way past my usual bedtime. The message from a girl named Amber who wrote eloquently and charmingly about how she too was looking for something of a lockdown bae herself. She was highly politically involved, as she put it, which definitely sparked my interest, in sharp comparison with the two other girls who wrote back to me who didn't seem interested in politics. She was also extremely intelligent. The way she was able to articulate her thoughts was something I had rarely encountered in online interactions, which is also why I was so shocked when I found out she was only 18, 11 years my junior. Only, when she described herself, I started to get suspicious. She seemed perfect. Too perfect. She told me she was 5'7", Asian American, fit, and toned from yoga and spin class. In her own words, she was pretty cute. Catfish was the first thought that came to my mind. There was absolutely no way a girl as cute sounding as that would be getting in contact with me, so I just made a joke about it. Well, a joke that wasn't really a joke. I basically called her out on it. How she didn't have to pretend to be some hot Asian girl just to get my attention, not with the kind of conversational skills that she did. The next message was just a link to an Imgur photo. A risky click, if ever there was one, as there was absolutely nothing in the way of caption to clue me into what the picture was of. But I suppose curiosity just got the better of me, and I just clicked. For those that don't already know, a verification photo is when a person handwrites their username or other critical information on a piece of paper to prove that they are indeed who they say they are. And yep, you guessed it, the picture was verification. As it turned out, Amber was exactly who she claimed to be.
Taking the
Young,
objective.
Asian, and impossibly gorgeous. I mean, I was literally stunned when I saw that picture of her. I just stopped and stared for what seemed like minutes. When it came to returning the favor, I was terrified. I am not in the least bit confident about my appearance, as I've made clear, and the idea of trying to take a selfie, something I'd never even done before that evening, was almost too much to bear. But I did it anyway. I combed my hair, washed my face, then went over my beard with the barely used trimmer my mom bought me for my 28th birthday. Basically her way of telling me to get that stuff off my face. Then, when I was done, I found my angle, took the photo, and then sent it over. The suspense, the raw suspense, oh my god. I honestly think the last time I was that nervous was before my first date I ever went on as a 17. I'm talking that heart-racing, sweaty palm, time-slowing down nervous that makes you feel sick to your stomach. I was convinced I'd never hear from her again, that she'd see how mismatched